I wanted to thank you all for coming here tonight. I'd like to introduce Bob Kelly from People's First and Don Hall that are here to talk about some housing issues that we're having in the town of Webb.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, good evening. I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces. That's a good thing. My name is Don Hall. I'm with the Opportunities for Upstate, consultant to the town of Webb for housing matters of all sorts. What I'd like to do briefly, and I say that with all sincerity, how did we get here? And that's really where I want to start. And how did we get to 2 informational sessions? How did we get to the housing crisis resolution that was passed before by this board? And the answer is one word: need. Beginning back in, I believe, around 2012, there was a study done, funded in part by New York State. I think it went through, at that time, CAP 21, that accentuated a severe housing crisis, affordable housing, in particular workforce development housing. That was confirmed again in the comprehensive master plan that was done subsequent to that. And then the Herkimer County Industrial Development Agency commissioned a study on what was a particular tract of land over on Joy Track Road. That study was expanded once we got into it and the reconnaissance efforts began, knowing that that wasn't going to do it, but there was a lot more to it. The housing, the scope of the housing crisis was much larger than we had imagined until we got into that study. So we went through a few things. I'm just going to give you some basics. This headline appeared in the Utica paper a couple weeks ago: housing crisis, etc., etc. It's statewide. 48 hours ago, I was at in Otsego County at the village of Richfield Springs. Can you hear me okay?
No.
Okay. All right. I'll crank it up an amp. So 48 hours ago, I was in the village of Richfield Springs at a board meeting there and met with a developer who's redoing the bank building downtown. They are from Cooperstown. Housing crisis there, workforce problems there. It's really all of upstate New York and beyond. So it's acute here. You have systematic housing shortages. Presently, we understand it's about 388 units in need just to meet current demand. And we're going to try to do some of that tonight. So without boring you, I even brought my highlighter, and so I'm going to pick and choose some select portions from the study that was done in 2019. It was pre-pandemic. But basically, wrong glasses. Love when you get this age. First of all, this is from the executive summary. There's no fast fix. The solution to your housing problem was not made overnight, and it's not going to get cured overnight. It's long-term in duration. The process is going to be step by step. There'll be multiple developments over the years to come, and each new unit that comes online and becomes a mix with your housing stock will help the problem, but again, there's no silver bullet per se. The population of Webb has been on decline since 2000, especially among people under age 50. The top-heavy segment of the population, 79%, is age 50 or over, and 1 out of 4 residents are between the age of 60 and 69. There are 4,272 housing units in the town. Of those, 79% are classified as vacant. That simply means this: when the survey is done, when the American Housing Survey is done by the decennial survey, they are classified as usual home elsewhere by the reviewers. Okay, so that gives you a huge amount, and I'll get into that in a minute. As far as what's really out there in the existing stock that's available, it's basically nil. So, and one other interesting thing that we went back to 2010, I think, or 2000. Let me see. There was. We went back to 1997. And in 1997, the average cost of a new dwelling here was $112,000. By 2019, the average cost of a new dwelling here was over $1 million, $1,010,20. So it's just been an upward slide as far as that's concerned. One of the conclusions of the study was that, very simply, as a tourist destination, many housing units are rented out seasonally, and they're not kept or meant to be kept for year-round residents, and thus you have a seasonal issue. 74% of your land is owned by the state of New York. You have 451 square miles here, 1,858 year-round residents, and that's a small number. So the problem thus compounds itself just in the availability of suitable land for development. Okay, of those 4,272 total housing units, owner-occupied units comprise 673. Renter-occupied units, 194, which is 4.5% of the total. So, needless to say, prima facie evidence, it's right there. And the Enchanted Forest Water Safari Complex is well aware of the issues. They've been doing their own housing for at least 25 years, bringing in seasonal workers for their operation, and they're going to continue to build more housing in the future. They have no choice, and it wouldn't be viable. Simple as that. So. When we did interviews, we interviewed both workers in a variety of locations in the town, and we also interviewed business owners. Some prefer to be anonymous, which is fine, but the common theme among the employees was too expensive or unavailable as a close second. There just isn't any rental housing. Business owners indicated that the wage scale is part of the problem, not easily solvable. So we got an uphill battle there. But the consensus among business owners was simply this: there's a scarcity of rental housing. Simple as that. And that's what we are trying to address. Okay, when we got to the end of the road on this study, the recommendations were put forth. One of the primary recommendations was to form a municipal housing authority, that the town of Webb would form a municipal housing authority. Wilmington, Lake Placid, Tupper Lake, Saranac, they all have one. And I encouraged everybody to interface with them. I then learned something that I did not know, and it's very simply this. In 1937, there was a select handful of housing authorities created under the new law then. City of Utica Housing Authority was one of them, now known as People's First. And when I met Mr. Calley, he informed me that they have in their charter, unlike any other housing authority since that era, the ability to help other entities, political subdivisions throughout the state of New York. and there's just a few of them. So I'm not going to steal any of his thunder, but we had a meeting in his office, chatted about web, and Breezeville's nice. So I am going to turn it over at this point, and I'll take any questions now, or I'll take them at the end. But I'm going to turn it over. So I'd like to introduce Robert Calley, who's the Executive Director of People First. And I've given you the needs and the background, and hopefully Mr. Calley is going to give us some solutions. Okay?
Thanks, Don.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Good evening. I want to thank Supervisor Baker and the members of the Town Council and the Town Board for allowing us again to have the opportunity to present our perspective as it pertains to what this endeavor might look like. I concur with Don in terms of the housing shortage, the affordable housing shortage in upstate New York. Yesterday we had a press conference in Utica, and we announced what we refer to as Impact Utica, which is a $350 million, 10-year affordable housing endeavor that we will spearhead in the city of Utica, with the first stages of that endeavor to be closed in December of this year, and construction starting in the early part of 2023. As part of this endeavor, we will not just reposition our existing housing stock and portfolio, but we will add new housing stock because the need is there. As we sit here today, our occupancy rates are 99.6%. We have 1,300 units, approximately 4,000 residents residing with us, and our waiting lists are only growing by the day and the week. So we understand the need, and so why would People First bring their skills and expertise and their passion to the town of Webb? And the answer is twofold. First, we believe that we have a civic responsibility to do that. A civic responsibility to help our community partners. And despite the fact that we're 50 miles away, we view the town of Webb or anybody in our region as a community partner. And if in fact we can lend some assistance, lend some experience to make the endeavor better, we're here to do that. The second reason is personal. My father purchased a camp here in the mid-70s. He considered his time here in Old Forge to be precious. He viewed this place to be his adopted home. And he continually reminded my brother and I that the reason that this place is special is not just the scenes or the water or the mountains. He always viewed the people to be special. He referred to them as being real and genuine, and never afraid to offer their perspective. And if he was here today, he would simply say, make sure you help these people. And secondly, he would emphasize, make sure you do it right. So those are the two reasons why we have brought our expertise and our experience to an endeavor such as this. I concur with Don that there's a need. And as we indicated last Thursday, and I see a lot of familiar faces, and I welcome you back. My comments aren't going to change. But you're in the people business here. And in order to be in the people business, you need people. And you need to create some stability from a housing standpoint for purposes of those people. And so I just want to address some misperceptions, if I may. I've heard on numerous occasions when people brought to our attention that they had heard that we had interest in the Adirondacks and in the acute need here. That we were going to bring the Utica people to this project. That this was going to be a public housing initiative, and we were going to attract, in some people's words, those undesirables. Well, I'll debate anybody as it pertains to the word undesirable. But I can tell you that that's not the intention here and the purpose of this endeavor. This initiative is to create workforce housing to meet an existing need and a demand within the greater town of Webb region. This is not to transplant people to the town of Webb. And that's never been discussed. It will never be discussed. It's not a public housing endeavor. I'll have to say this, in all defense to the people that we serve, they're good, hardworking people. They might not possess the same levels of socioeconomic benchmarks and milestones that other people have achieved. But the lion's share of the people that we serve are hardworking people. And they're looking for an opportunity. One of the questions that was posed, which was a very good question last week, is can this endeavor truly assist and benefit people that work on a seasonal basis? And what we said last week and what we've confirmed during the course of this week is the answer is yes. If you have seasonal employees who are going to be laid off for a month or 2 or 3 months, they can in fact qualify for this type of housing. And the range of salaries that they can earn and be eligible for this type of workforce housing is as low as 30% of your AMI. And Don, if my recollection serves me, last week you said that number in the most recent census for AMI purposes, average median income was $61,000. So 30% of that is in the low 20s. So if in fact you make $20,000, you can qualify. And at the top of the range, you can earn up to 130% of AMI, which brings you up into the $80,000 to $85,000 range. So you have a sizable gamut that you can serve from a compensation perspective. Now, there will be regulatory guidelines for workforce housing. There will be guidelines that will be established by the town in addition to those, and People First in addition to the regulatory guidelines. So there is some flexibility as it pertains to what type of workforce housing population that you want to serve. And so you have that discretion. The state of New York has dealt with workforce housing in the North Country, from what we've been told preliminarily in our conversations with Homes and Community Renewal. There were at least 3 applications that were approved in the North Country based upon my conversation with the Eastern State Representative. So this is not pie in the sky. This is being done as we speak. The state of New York has been extremely progressive in trying to generate affordable housing opportunities in this state. 5 years ago, they earmarked $2.5 billion to be allocated over a 5-year term. They have dispensed that $2.5 billion. In Governor Hochul's State of the Union address in March, she replenished that $2.5 billion for another 5 years. So there are opportunities as we speak for funding to engage in a project of this magnitude. The one thing that I'll commend the town board on two things. One, trying to be proactive and address this issue. And the second thing is their insistence, which we concur with, that this cannot be done without community engagement. There has to be public input and perspective provided on both sets of the aisle. We're not looking to, we're looking to make the best decision. And the best decision is to hear everybody's perspective, good, bad, or indifferent. And this session will be repeated as we move through the process. Because we don't have visual boards here, we don't have site renderings, we don't have exterior renderings, we don't have elevation drawings, we don't have site plans, we don't have floor plans. And the reason is very simple. We are really at the infancy stages of this endeavor. And there are a lot of things that have to take place from this point forward to bring this to fruition. But at each stage, public input will be sought. Because at the end of the day, while my family has the good fortune of having a camp here, as I indicated last week, we're truly your guests. You're the hosts. And in order to do the project right, the hosts have to play a vital and integral role in what's going to take place. Because this is your community. And we're very cognizant of the fact that we're guests, and we're going to respect our hosts as we move forward. Now, I know people resent change, fearful of change. That's human nature. I get it. But I can say this after working in close conjunction with Don and members of the town board and your supervisor, that it's readily apparent from my perspective that status quo just won't cut it. And while this project will only be a piece of the solution, we've got to start somewhere. And the time is ripe to do it. Because at some point in time, those monies are going to be exhausted. And there will be a serious question as to whether or not they're going to be replenished, to the extent that they are now. So I might be warped, I might be subjective in my perspective, but I try to maintain objectivity. And from an objective perspective, based upon what we have heard, status quo just won't cut it. So what does our project look like from a high elevation perspective? I let the cat out of the bag last week when I talked about North Street. So we have agreed in principle to acquire a piece of property on North Street. We haven't signed a contract because we as an organization said that we want to have these public information sessions before we present a purchase offer. We believe it provides an adequate footprint for what we seek to do. There are a host of contingencies that will have to be met as it pertains to bringing this project to fruition, and it starts with doing a formal market study. Have somebody come in and truly understand the dynamics of what's taking place, provide that input to us in addition to the information that Don has gleaned. And that will tell us a lot about needs. That will tell us a lot about wealth factors. It would tell us a lot about where the sweet spots are for purposes of being able to make sure that we develop a project that truly meets the demands, meets the interest, and assists in trying to address this acute need. We will also have funding contingencies. You know, when you do an affordable project, the one thing that you'll understand is that there's nothing affordable about it. It's really a misnomer from my standpoint. Affordable housing, based upon the standards and the regulatory requirements, in a lot of instances, is more expensive than market rate and in private housing. Because the environmental standards, the energy standards that you must achieve, the quality of materials that you must utilize is very costly and can be more costly than a market rate. And we've done both in the last 5 years, and our affordable project was in fact more costly on a per unit or per square foot basis than our market rate endeavor. So we have, the questions have been asked in terms of how long this project might take to get in the ground. It's fair to say that under normal circumstances, a project like this takes a year to secure all the necessary approvals, get all the necessary funding in place, and establish a closing. There are two types of low-income housing tax credits that would be available for a project like this. So a housing tax credit project is when an insurance company, for an example, or an investment company wants to secure tax credits, federal and state tax credits, meaning to reduce their tax burden. And so what they do is they buy tax credits. They invest in projects such as this. And in return for the investment, over the course of 15 to 20 years, depending upon what the applicable compliance period is, they get tax breaks, corporate tax breaks. And so those are the type of investors that purchase these tax credits and invest in projects such as this. But tax credits alone will not fund a project. A project will require some additional resources. There'll be hard debt, meaning repayable debt associated therewith. There will be gap funding that the state has silos of money to utilize to offset deficiencies. The state will ensure that that this has positive cash flow on an annual basis, because they will not fund a project that borders on being in the red. And so they will ensure that before they put any money into a project, it will price itself out on a budgetary standpoint and on an operating perspective over the course of 30 years. The compliance period, as I indicated, is 15 years. So an entity, whoever owns this parcel, and it's proposed that the endeavor be owned by People First and managed and operated by People First, we will have a very limited legal interest in the property during the compliance period. We will manage and oversee the project. The investors don't do that. But the lion's share of the ownership is owned by the investor. But at the end of the compliance period, that investor wants out. They have secured the benefits of the tax credit. They no longer want to be burdened with risk and liability. So built into the documents that support this endeavor, there is an option to purchase the project for a nominal sum of money, $100, at the end of the compliance period. But the state of New York wants to ensure that this remains an affordable endeavor. They're not looking to fund a project and you create an affordable housing or workforce housing endeavor, and at the end of the compliance period, you then start renting to snowmobiles. That's not what the state won't approve. And so from a regulatory standpoint, their regulatory guidelines stay on and run against the property for a term of at least 30 years. they want to ensure that that what's being intended is there for the long haul, not for a short period of time. So a question was posed last Thursday is, well, essentially, you will then have the freedom of doing whatever you want with the property at the end of the 15 years. And the answer is no. No, it's a 30-year obligation and a 30-year responsibility as it relates thereto. What do we envision a project like this to look like? We wish we had visual aids. I mean, those speak volumes as it pertains to what our mindset and perspective is. We want to create an Adirondack Lodge theme. We don't want one big apartment building that creates 30 or 40 or 50 units and it's 3 or 4 stories tall. That's not what we'd like to construct and design. Understanding the footprint of what's usable and not usable will play obviously a tremendous role in ascertaining exactly what can and cannot be built. But what we did in our most recent project in Utica, which is a 50-unit scattered site endeavor with 26 buildings, is we maximized each building by only having 2 units per building. So we had, there are some that are garden style, which are a level, 1 floor, first floor, second floor. We had townhouse style, which is up and down units, but only 2 units per building. That's what we would like to bring to the North End. We don't want just an apartment building that's cookie cutter, does not create the necessary ambiance or character to fit in to the North Country. We don't want something that stands out like a sore thumb. So our thought is to have individual 2-unit buildings, and depending upon the number of units that is warranted under the market study, as long as the footprint allows us to do that. The other question that was posed, and rightfully so, is how do you ensure that you're not going to attract those so-called undesirables? Legitimate question. So I will just tell you what our standard is in the city of Utica. When someone applies to our agency, they have to go through a criminal background check. They have to have their fingerprints taken. We can send out and request an FBI check on that. They have to provide us, we generate a credit report, and we have a minimum credit standard for our occupants. They have to provide us both landlord and personal references. I asked this question last week, and I'll ask it again. How many people in the town of that do those things for purposes of their rental units? I would suggest very few. And when you lease these units on an annual basis. And so the process that I just referred to has to be done over every year. It's called a recertification process. You have to recertify your employment, you have to recertify your salary by providing tax returns, and the like. And they have to go through the process all over. We'll add another layer to this. And the additional layer that we don't presently do in the city of Utica is we have to, you're going to have to prove that there's a need for workforce housing. So it's not as though that any Tom, Dick, or Harry can walk in off the street and sign up and lease a unit. They told us in the city of Utica when we built Roosevelt Residences that we were the 3rd developer that the city of Utica contacted. The first 2 developers couldn't bring it to fruition. we did an application, and it really doesn't mean anything to you, but we did an application, an award-worthy application in 90 days from scratch. That application normally takes 8 months to a year to complete. When we set our mind to it, we move forward. We don't cut corners. It's not the point, but we know how to get applications done. So they said that we wouldn't generate much interest in these units. So we did a microsite while we were under construction on Roosevelt Residences. And we, remember, 50 units. We received 700 inquiries and over 500 applications. As I alluded to, our occupancy rate is 99%. I'd be shocked if, in fact, that a project of this magnitude with the acute need that's needed within this community isn't oversubscribed. Because I believe the gamut of the salary from 30% AMI to 130% AMI allows a lot of people to be eligible from a workforce perspective for these units. The other question that was posed last Thursday was, well, are you going to be increasing the tax base or contributing to the tax base of the town of Webb for this endeavor? And the answer is not to the extent that a private developer would, who's not going through affordable housing. A private developer who's going through affordable housing is going to ask the same things that the state of New York demands. So the state of New York says to communities, listen, you've got to buy in to these endeavors. We're not going to invest in your community if in fact we're going to be at odds with you. So one of the things that they mandate, our project would be dead on arrival, regardless of how good the project is, regardless of how good the financials look like, regardless of how good the balance of the budget is from a cash flow standpoint. If we don't have a pilot, that's really an automatic denial. And I can only tell you, we haven't talked about the how to formulate a pilot for this endeavor. So that's uncharted territory as we sit here today. But I will tell you what we did in the city of Utica. On Roosevelt Residences, what we proposed is whatever the tax assessment for the barren land that the property sits on currently, that will serve as a baseline for purposes of taxation. Meaning, the town, the school will not receive any less than what they currently receive, because that's what they receive. They receive taxes based upon a barren, empty parcel of land. And what we did, it's required to have a 30-year pilot. And what we did is increase that baseline by 2% per year thereafter. So let's be totally transparent. To suggest that there are going to be windfall taxes generated from an endeavor like this is false. Not true. But it's not going to be a tax-free endeavor either. There will be no loss in tax revenue to the municipalities based upon the current assessments of the parcel. But to say that there's going to be a windfall generated during that 30-year term is a misperception. So we would need a pilot. The other questions that have been posed were last week, and I think it came from people right here in the back row, with regards to school district capacity. The school district will certainly have the opportunity, and the school board will have the opportunity to chime in with regards to that issue. Just in passing with the comments that have been made by people as it relates to that topic, because the topic from a general perspective has been raised, is that the capacity as we sit here today for that school district has dropped tremendously. And I've heard people suggest that it's at a 50% capacity level to what it was some time ago. So it would appear to me, and you know better than I, and maybe I'm wrong, but based upon what I heard, is that there is capacity to meet the needs of the people and the children that would live in an endeavor such as this. The other thing I'll just mention, and it was mentioned by a couple of people when I was talking last weekend when I was up here, was that people said to me, it's about time that we try to stabilize the teachers that are teaching our children in terms of residing in this community. That there are a lot of teachers, or there are teachers, the word wasn't a lot, there are teachers that have difficulty finding what they view as acceptable housing in this community. Heard that in passing. Do I have any empirical data to suggest that that's accurate? But that was suggested, that if in fact people felt that there was a stabilized housing market in which they could reside, we might be able to maintain the teachers for a longer period of time. And we all know continuity, whether it's in teaching or anything else in life, is important. It's important that you just don't transition from one teacher to the next on a 2 or 3 year basis. So, and I say that, ladies and gentlemen, because I had the pleasure, really the privilege, of sitting for 10 years on a school board. So I understand the dynamics of schools, and I understand the challenges that are confronted by schools, and I understand what it means when you have turnover with regards to personnel and teachers. And so that's my perspective as it pertains to the school district, based upon things that have been told. So our goal here is that if in fact we feel comfortable that that there is public support for this, and it's warranted, then we're ready to start the process like yesterday. We have contacted redevelopment partners that have assisted us in the past on projects, and asked them if they would have interest and capacity to do so here in the town. So we have put together what we believe is a preliminary team that's ready to move forward with an endeavor. But we want to do it with your support. We're not here to create animosity or division within the ranks. We're here truly to address what we perceive as a need. One of the other questions that was posed is, what role will the town play in this endeavor? And they will play a critical role. We view the town, although they have no ownership interest in the endeavor, to be a collaborator on this project. And so we won't sneeze without notifying the town. Again, we're here to be guests, and good guests keep people apprised of what's taking place. You don't know me, but I'm a pretty transparent guy. My lowest employee knows as much about our housing authority, which is a $20 million, has a $20 million annual budget, as I do. We think that's important. We think communication and coordination is at the forefront of being successful, whether it's successful as an operating entity or successful in putting together an award-worthy and community-supported endeavor such as this. Be happy to address. Oh, so what's the role of the town? I would, again, we haven't gotten to this stage, but the state not only wants to see that a town and a community is supportive of a project, but they also like to see that the town would have some skin in the game, would make a financial investment in a project such as this. The difficulty with a project, an affordable project, is very simple. You have to do a lot of work and spend a lot of money in advance of getting your approval. In order for them to review your application, you have to have your architectural and engineering design at a 70 or 80% completion level. That costs money. For example, in the Roosevelt project, we had to incur approximately $300,000 of pre-development expenses, with no assurances that you're going to get approved. Now, if you do get approved, that money is reimbursed to you at the time of closing in full, as long as it's not totally out of whack with what a project costs should entail. But there is risk. There is risk. We would probably ask the town to contribute towards that risk and assist us with that risk. But where we're different than a lot of developers is this: it's not always about the bottom line. With private developers, they come in and they only worry about a tenant is a number. A project is a short-term commitment to a community. They worry about what the net profit is. We have the luxury, because we are truly a public benefit corporation, which is another form of a not-for-profit. We want the bottom line to balance, but we're not driven by the bottom line. So what we would propose, if in fact there was a financial stakeholder interest generated by the town, is that they would share in the reward. Because if you take some risk, you've got to share in the reward. And so what's the reward? When you do projects like this, there are what is called developer fees generated. These are essentially carrots that are dangled in front of developers, whether you be not-for-profit or for-profit, for purposes of taking on risk. You generate a reward. And so what we've essentially told the board, again, from a high elevation standpoint, we haven't had any in the weeds discussions, is that if in fact they take on risk, then they've got to share equally in the reward. That's only fair. So, we've taught that it's been brought up in our discussions that we would have to make sure that there's sufficient capacity and sufficient pressures in the public water system to add this project to that water or sewer district. Some people have indicated that there might be the necessity of creating a pump station to supplement what's there to address the site in question. Those are all things that have to play out and be weeded out as part of your due diligence process. So from an engineering, architectural standpoint, an environmental, a wetland standpoint, from a footprint standpoint, doing soil borings, doing market studies, making sure you got all your funding in place. We're not exempt. And one of the questions that was posed by someone here last Thursday, are you exempt from the planning or zoning board process? And the answer is no. No, we have to be treated just like anybody else and go through planning and zoning if necessary in order to get this project off the ground. So we have to go through the APA process for purposes of endeavor such as this. So there are a lot of steps and a lot of work and a lot of risk. And so the last question I'll just pose is this. It was a great question that was posed, and I didn't answer it correctly. And it wasn't at last week's meeting, it was a couple weeks before. And the question is, why not just create a public housing authority in the town of Webb and let that public housing authority take on the project? There's no reason you can't do that. It's not going to be easy to create one. They don't really like to create public housing authorities anymore. And the one thing that would be put at your disadvantage if in fact you created a public housing authority is that there are a slew of financial guarantees that have to be pledged as a result of this project. And the major one is one that's very simple. And that is, if you cannot deliver on the tax credits that investor expects to get on an annualized basis, then you owe them the money out of your own funds. And that's costly. You can't buy insurance for it. You essentially pledge assets that you have in your unrestricted reserves. There's construction guarantees, there's payment and performance bonds that have to be pledged. If you don't, they give you 2 years. In most instances, they give you 2 years to start occupancy. If you don't, then you're penalized on a daily basis there. If you don't, you have to reach what they call conversion within 6 months, I believe it's 6 months, of starting occupancy. And what is conversion? Conversion is that you have to be at a 90% occupancy rate for a continuous period of at least 90 days before you can enter into what they call convert your construction debt into permanent debt. And if you don't reach, and they call it a 90-90 rule, if you don't reach 90-90, there's more penalties imposed. So, Roosevelt residents, we retained a co-developer to take on the risk of construction. They overshot the 2-year construction timetable. And in that endeavor, and it's how long of a delay in construction and completion there is. In that endeavor, the penalties were over $400,000. So in this particular endeavor, that risk would fall upon us. So, everybody looks at this and says that huge cash flow, huge benefit to a developer, whether it be us or anybody else. But they don't understand the risks and the upfront costs that you have to incur in order to get to a point where a decision is made.
Regarding the occupancy, the occupancy commitment, what's the plan if that's not met?
Well, if it's not met, then, and we're seeking to amend the regulatory guidelines that we're required to follow, which is workforce housing, then we would have to go back to the town and we would have to go back to the state and see if in fact those guidelines could be changed and revised in order to bring the occupancy in line. But these market studies that are done up front, the state sent me one from a North Country developer that was either has done a project or is in the midst of doing a project, are pretty entailed. If there's doubt, they're going to allocate the resources somewhere else where there isn't doubt. So you have a high standard of proof that's required in order to receive a financial commitment from the state of New York to do a project like this. They take that criteria really, really seriously, because most of the monies that are generated to do this project are either from that investor or from the state. There's very, very little hard debt that's generated from a project such as this. As I indicated to the people last week, we have Roosevelt Residences is now going into its 4th year, and our net revenues after we pay the expenses that are reflected in our operating budget, $50,000 to $60,000 annually. That can be wiped out in a heartbeat if in fact we don't meet the criteria of that investor. So, the risks don't go away when you open up and you give people keys. That risk remains in place for that 15-year compliance period. And so that's why you don't find a lot of developers. It's not a rich proposition from the standpoint of net operating income. Yeah, you generate developer fees. We get a management fee in addition to the net operating reserves or the net operating income at Roosevelt Residences, and that's to perform all the necessary functions to certify that these are eligible residents under the regulatory guidelines, and it's a lengthy process. We generate about $40,000. So between the two of them, we might generate $80,000 to $90,000. But there's a lot of work. There's more work. I can say this. There's more work involved in an affordable project than there is in a public housing project. The process in a public housing endeavor is a lot more streamlined than it is in affordable. So unless you're doing it from, if you want to do this thing, you got to do it for more than just money. You do it because you want to make a commitment. You want to better a community. You want to address a need. And so, if you're doing it for money, you've chosen the wrong field to quote unquote generate a score. Because I think the perception is, hey, Cali and Utica or any other private developer that's traveling 50 miles to the town of Webb is looking to generate a score. And I can tell you, these types of projects are labors of love, not a score. So with that said, I'll be happy to address anybody's questions.
Actually, 3 things. The pilot program, you said 2% per year increase. Was that during the 30 years? Okay, so once it's turned over each year, it goes up 2%.
Yeah, based upon land assessments, not land and building assessments, just
Right.
land only.
Right.
That's what we did previously. Now, again, this is a negotiated thing. There is no formula that drives pilots. It's an endeavor that's undertaken either with the town fathers, or you go to an agency such as the Herkimer IDA, and you put an application in through the IDA, and they can grant pilots in addition to the town fathers. A lot of towns, villages, cities, for example, don't want to be in that business. They don't believe they have the expertise and the wherewithal to make those kind of decisions. So they defer to the county IDA or the city IDA to process those requests. So it would either go in front of the Herkimer IDA on the pilot request, or the town fathers have the right to generate pilots.
Again?
Yeah.
Okay.
You said you had 3 questions.
Yeah, thank you. And you also said that ideally you would want to hire locally to be maintenance, property management, security, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, every community is unique in and of itself. We're not looking to transplant people from Utica to work in the town of Webb. That would be contrary to the ultimate purpose that we're trying to serve. We're trying to create jobs and opportunities as a result of this endeavor and stabilize opportunities. So, yeah, we would look first to people here to serve in management, maintenance, And, you know, we haven't had discussions with regards to security, something that we can contract with the town police. And utilize off-duty police officers. We do that in the city of Utica. So, again, we'd like it to be local.
Great, and then I think the third question was, or reinstatement was, you maintain all of the roadways and the lighting and everything within the complex. It's your responsibility.
We shovel, we plow, we mow, we repair. Again, we don't envision, there's a question that was posed last week. We don't envision that we would be dedicating roads to the town to take over. If we did, it'd have to be built according to the town or the county, or whatever the specification, the road specifications that you utilize. But that's not envisioned at this point. Yes?
Have you or the town board given any thought to how many school-age children would come out of this project? Town board, anybody want to answer that?
How many school-age children? I think that goes back to the market study that he mentioned in the very beginning.
But you have no number.
How would I have numbers before the market study?
Seems like you don't have very much.
If I get a chance later, I'm gonna address why we're doing this. The things that you haven't been aware of, obviously, so we'll talk about that.
You're not making us aware of it.
We,
Mr. Kelly's doing a nice job. You people are sitting there like
This
school children
meeting is an
yourselves.
informational meeting that
Pardon
we
me?
are not supposed to be involved in. This is Bob Kelly's meeting.
Then my
That's why
question-
the board is not speaking.
I see. But you will address some of this at some
Yes,
point?
we will.
Will we be invited to this
Yes, you
meeting?
will.
you're invited to every board meeting.
So let me just provide my perspective.
That'd be nice.
Good question. I'll be honest with you. I came here blind. I sent a blind letter in August of 2021. And I just said, if we can help, this is to the town. I've never met these people, but I've generated a lot of respect for them over the course of the last 6 months. They aren't blind. They've asked all of the right questions, but remember, we're really at infancy stage. We're at ground zero. And so the market study will prove or give us some indications as to the demographics that we're going to address and the needs of those demographics. Those demographics will push how many units are 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, which will then get us into how many school-age children might in fact reside in this. So it's a sequential process. We just haven't gotten there. Good question.
Can I speak for a moment?
Sure, absolutely.
One thing that we, as a board, when we sat here, we all along said we don't want to do anything unless the community is involved.
With that being said, we're gonna have a vote. Just gonna go in front of a vote for the town of Webb.
Okay.
'Cause that was brought up last week.
May I bring up the comprehensive plan?
Certainly.
So, in 2016, now you'll get my spiel, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just interject.
I don't want to
for a
take
few
away
minutes.
from him if it-
In 2016, we started work on a comprehensive plan. I was on the planning board at the time. The chairwoman was tasked with starting that whole process. So, in a year or so, I ended up on the town board, but we had 31 local people that were involved in the advisory committee. We had community input all over all of the hamlets of this town. And so there was tremendous community input. And one of the biggest things, the number one of 12 categories, is housing. Housing is a need here. There's not enough workforce, period, workforce people. We need workforce housing. We need affordable housing. The recommendations that came from this community, from this plan, that are in this plan, that was just adopted in 2019, state that we need to provide all levels of housing, all different kinds of housing. This is one place that we start in order to do that. So, do we have exact numbers to give you? No. Do we know that there's declining enrollment in the school? Yes. Do we know that we don't have enough people here to fill the jobs? Yes, because there's a sign on every business that you look at. I'm not done. And the average age of the person that lives in this community is me. I'm 63 years old. That age is following me throughout this process since I started on the master plan committee group. So we're getting older, we aren't bringing more people in. Another thing that's mentioned in here is that we need to bring young families into this community. So and this was adopted by the town after public hearing, which is your vote that you're asking about. The public did acknowledge this, and then the board adopted it. There's your vote. We need housing desperately. And it's spoken to time and again here and in other studies that have been done. So I'm sorry if I seem like I'm getting riled, but it really frustrates me that some of you come into the room that you have not heard the conversations and you haven't asked the questions either. So while we aren't able to say everything right up front, I'm happy to tell you, you can ring my phone anytime and I'll talk with you about what the needs are beyond what the needs were identified when he started working for us, Mr. Hall, excuse me.
We're aware of the need, just not maybe terribly happy with the way you're trying to solve the problem.
Well, I'm sorry.
What can I just ask? What is a better option to resolve the problem?
Not a better option, not suggesting. I don't know if any of on the board have had any experience with affordable housing. I happen to have some. I don't know if anybody on the board have had any experience with Section 8 tenants. I've had considerable, 52 years of it as a matter of fact. It is not good. It never ends well. The Section 8 tenants.
Thank you.
I don't like the way you categorize people as undesirables. I'm not talking about that. Nobody is undesirable.
Okay.
I'm talking about what they do to the housing. I've had houses that are literally almost destroyed by Section 8. You go to Section 8, I had one tenant that had $40,000 worth of damage. Section 8 came after me for $1,800 security deposit. Cost me untold amount of money to not pay it. I refuse to give it to them.
Well, I can only, let me just answer.
If you create the situation, another affordable housing or subsidized housing, whatever you term it, with semantics, did some work in some, you couldn't go in and do any work in these buildings because you had to send a guard with them. They were so dangerous. Now, are we going to be fighting all of this here for the very limited benefit you're going to get from 52 houses?
It has to, first of all, it has to, those are all good points.
You'll have 54 because if this goes in, I'll be selling my two.
Those are all 2 points, and I respect your perspective. And I'll just share you with mine. We never said anything about the fact we're bringing vouchers to this endeavor.
When the state gets involved,
No,
you have no
no,
choice.
no.
Yeah,
you said
vouchers. Last week you said
You can bring vouchers, but I never said that we were going to bring vouchers.
Well, you can.
Well, you can, but you have to go through a process. It's not something where that's automatic. Let me just finish the question, and I'll be happy to answer the point. The second thing is, I'll just tell you how we operate. I don't know the affordable projects that you operate, that you're referencing, but here's what we do. We have 1,300 units. We visit every unit once per month. We physically knock on every door of every complex once per month. Because we believe that if you show people that you're genuine and you care, and you want to assist them with regards to whatever issues that they're being confronted by, that you'll get that back from the standpoint of them trusting us and taking better care of their units. And what we have found is this. As I told you, our housing stock goes back to 1939 when it was first completed. We can't compete with regards to the modern amenities, the layouts that are provided by private developers who have built sites within our community. And people said to us, they're going to put you out of business. And the exact opposite has happened. Because they worry about a key. They worry about the bottom line. We worry about the person. And I'll just, rhetoric's cheap, I get it. Talk's cheap. You can say, a lot of people will say, Callie's just blowing smoke. I don't blow smoke, number one. I wasn't raised that way. But number two, well, I'll just tell you this in terms of why we're not blowing smoke. I could, when I started at this position, I could spell poverty, but I didn't understand the context of what poverty really is. Had absolutely no idea. So I'll give you 3 examples. And these aren't exceptions to the rule. These are real, everyday experience that happen over and over and over. And it's not because they feel entitled. 1, senior complex. Lady, 91 years old. Our flagship property. She was always in the community room every day, attending to the needs of others, not herself. So in 2013, we initiated this monthly inspection process. At our family sites, we call it Family and Friends. At our senior sites, we call it the Guardian Angel Program. So I went in to her unit on this particular occasion. Unit was no bigger than the size of this room. She had 1 piece of furniture in her entire apartment. And it was a Barca lounger that was tilted to the right because the feet were broken. Within 2 weeks, we fully furnished her apartment. 2, went into a family unit at Adrian Terrace, our largest complex, our oldest complex, again in 2013. And I went up to a bedroom and I saw 2 cribs where the ends of each crib was removed. And these cribs were ganged together. And I said to myself, I'm not astute enough to know why they did this. Well, I'll tell you why. The girls were 13, and they were twins. And when they were born, they lived in the cribs. And when they were 13, they still lived in the cribs. And the parents of these 2 children got into a car, they still resided, got into a car at 4 o'clock every morning and carpooled to Chobani in West Edmonston, working 12-hour shifts. They weren't looking for a handout, but they were living hand to mouth. And again, within a couple of days, they had beds. The 3rd example is a recent example. There was a fire in Utica. And there's 2 of these stories. I'll tell you both of them. A fire in Utica. And 2 sisters resided together in a unit. One was active in the U.S. military. The other one worked at the Bank of America in the call center in Marcy. They each had 3 children. They lived in private housing. They didn't live in public housing. They had a fire. They lost 2 of the 6 children. This is within the last 6 days. It was just before Christmas. Came into our offices. They didn't whine, they didn't cry, they didn't beg. They were truly embarrassed to be there. And we took them into a conference room, and they said, we were told to come down. And they told their backstory. And they did it begrudgingly. They weren't looking for a handout. And their story was very simple. is that for whatever reason, they fell through the cracks with regards to the community support system. They weren't given hotel rooms, they weren't given clothing, they weren't given food vouchers or stipends for purposes of meeting their interim needs. They had spent the last 3 days at the North Utica Walmart parking lot where they parked their cars next to each other and they lived out of their cars. I'll never forget it. We had 30 people, no exaggeration, 30 people on a Thursday and Friday. We had 2 units across the street from one another. And between Thursday and Friday, we prepped these 2 apartments. They were vacant, but they hadn't been prepped for reoccupancy. And we fully furnished those apartments. So within 24 hours, or 48 hours, we had prepped 2 apartments, and we had provided them with a place of abode for their respective families. And we're proud to say that the one active military person is now being restationed to South Carolina, she couldn't believe that there was somebody in the community who would step up to the plate and do that. And the last story, and it's another heartbreaker. A family of 5 kids, 2 parents, I believe. Kids were all under the age of 8. Had a fire. Again, within 24 or 36 hours, we had fully furnished their apartment. And the funny thing is that I had the opportunity, I had the privilege, not the opportunity, I had the privilege of meeting the 5 kids. Yes, sir, no, sir. Stood up, shook your hand, looked you in the eye. Just very respectful, young men and women. And so I asked them, can I give you, I got some cookies. I've got some candy. And I've never heard this. I've got 5 grandkids under the age of 8. And you know what they said to me was, you think you can slice up any celery or cucumbers for me, or do you have broccoli crowns? Because we don't eat sweets. Okay, and those people live with us today. So my point is this: on an annualized basis, and what distinguishes us from other landlords is that if you take care of the person, all those extraneous things that are important and relevant and occur in apartments will take care of themselves. And so we spend on an annualized basis $50,000 of our own unrestricted monies every year, and just to provide mattresses, box springs, and frames. Think of that. $50,000 a year to address something that you and I never think twice. So that's what we bring to this community. And we will not allow what you just described to happen, because it does happen. We're a microcosm of society. We have bad tenants, okay? But I can tell you this, that if they're bad, they're not going to be there for very long.
If you do in fact what you just said, I don't think you'll have any problem getting your project in here. You just have to convince us that you'll do that. I don't know how you're going to do it, but you'll have to do that.
I think to second that, I think that's where a lot of the questions.
Socioeconomic has nothing to do with it. That's not what I was talking about.
Excuse me, Bob, I thought it was very important that you know tonight that the superintendent of the schools is here, as well as 4 of the board members in our audience. Could you guys please...
But not as a quorum.
Yeah, we're not even sitting here. That's fine back here.
I just wanted to let you know they were here.
I have great respect for people who not only serve on town boards and school boards. It's a thankless job, but one that's greatly needed in a community. And you know, to have the privilege of being able to train and educate the hearts and souls of the next generation is a unbelievable responsibility, but it's an unbelievable privilege at the same time. And those were 10 of my best years of my life, walking in on Tuesday nights and participating in board meetings. So I commend you for being here, and I commend you for your service. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's making the final decision whether this particular project is going to be built? Is it you and the board alone, or the residents have a say?
I would hope that it would be all of the above. I mean, that's the whole purpose of community engagement.
Well, how are the residents going to have a vote, like they said before, or how are the residents going to have?
Well,
let's say,
I
whether
think you
build
have
it?
forums like this to try to gauge the interest level. Whether or not you take a vote is not a decision that
I'm just
we
talking
make.
about one particular project. I know we need housing, that's definite. But what other projects have you looked into?
We had a developer that did come and met with us. We've been doing our due diligence for about 2 years on this when we started talking about where we're at. And we found out that there were too many complications with that location. We couldn't move the road, we were gonna still need a pump station, the expense, so even though it was town property, that wasn't going to work, and it ultimately wouldn't be big enough. But when the developer that we spoke to at that time sat in this audience, they were talking about how high the rent would be, because there was no assistance for it. And their projections were higher than what anybody's already paying. We wouldn't be able to, the community would not benefit from it.
And do you know how many actual all year-round residents need housing? Do you have a number?
We have done, and goes back to what Mr. Hall said earlier. We're down 388 units by that, and then the market study that Mr. Cali talks about will give us more specifics for what the need is. But again, I go back to this master plan from 2016, and I'm gonna guess that the one that was adopted in 2002 also spoke to housing. It has been a need for a long time. CAP 21 works on multiple ways to improve density in housing with existing housing. We're working with Mr. Hall on ways to improve individuals' homes that need help improving their homes. We've talked with a man in Eagle Bay who has some ideas about property that he owns. We're reaching out every way that we can. This is one part of the whole picture, and it's a really important part.
But I still don't have an answer. Who's making the final decision?
Well, the board will ultimately.
I mean, I'll just add this. You know, when we negotiated to purchase this parcel and came to an agreement in principle with regards to acquiring it, our board agreed to take on certain risks because the seller said, hey, listen, we don't want to keep this property off the market for up to a year with no assurances that it's ever going to be closed. And so we have to commit a $50,000 non-refundable deposit towards this endeavor. I think that we wouldn't be willing, well, $50,000 is not a month. We wouldn't be willing to make that kind of overture and commitment if we didn't think that there was need and that this endeavor could play a role, not the role, a role in addressing the underlying housing need within the community. I know you've had your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, I just was wanting to ask you, and then I'm gonna put my opinion in, but what did you mean by status quo when you were initially speaking about, you were saying status quo?
Yeah, I mean, status quo is very simple, is that if in fact you believe there's a need and you do nothing, that's status quo. Then the need's still going to be out there and potentially could worsen. I mean, I've heard of all these potential restaurants and hotels that might not open some of their operations during the course of the season. And everyone says to me, with regards to people, is that they don't want to do that, but are forced out of necessity to do that because they don't have the staffing necessary to make a full-time commitment for their entire
Most of these
operations.
restaurants are 3 months of work,
Mm-hmm.
and most tourism is 3 to 4 months. What are these people gonna do after their 3 months of work? Where are they gonna be working?
No, that point is a great point, and that was a point that was raised at the last meeting. And Tom Greco said that he had a totally different viewpoint, and I don't
I
mean to
don't
put
think you
words.
go just by what Tommy Greco.
I know you're talking about one employer. How many employers are actually looking for?
Well,
Here.
I see it.
Full time.
Let me ask you this question: if you're not taking the risk, what's the fallout to you if in fact a development is built? What's the fallout to the town residents if in fact we build this and so-called they won't come?
I
If you
guess
build
I'm
it, they
afraid
will
of
come.
what you're gonna fill that with.
And what's
If
that?
if nobody's working
Mhm.
for 9 months out of the year,
They're gonna be hungry.
what are they gonna do?
I've been told seasonal employees are not nine. There might be 9-month people that these
We've had
young men and women.
restaurants, we've had construction companies.
But you've got 2 seasons from what I see. You've got a
They're not
snowmobile
long
season,
seasons.
and you have a summer season. And I think combined that those 2 seasons are longer than 3 months.
I think there's a few people who think that the world is changing up here, and it's still a tourism town.
So it's
We're gonna find
tourism, but how are you going to
that
address
we have
tourism?
stuff that needs to be rented, and we still don't rent it very easily. And it's nice places, and we've got more than enough help for what we do because we pay well. I would like to see more people making more money. I'd like to see tourism improve. I don't think this is the way to go as far as bringing in low-income housing. I don't think this is gonna bring my kids back.
Drive down through Utica, New Hartford, and look at all the help wanted signs. It's not just here. It's everywhere.
We
It's everywhere.
acknowledge that.
So we're not gonna build more houses in Utica to put more low-income housing in for people to be on welfare.
The one thing, the one thing that I'll challenge you until I am
Bring it
a
on.
horse
Let's go.
is that this isn't low-income housing. This isn't welfare housing.
It'll turn into that.
No, it will not. It will not.
How do you stop it?
It will not.
How do you stop it?
You have guidelines. You have regulatory requirements with regards to workforce housing. You can't
stop
deviate.
people from staying
You
here.
can't deviate. Yes, you can.
How do you do that? You
have
tell me.
because we have
That's discrimination.
The state of New York has laws
Yeah.
that once someone's in a place, you can't just kick them out.
Yeah,
you
Herkimer
can't.
and
That's
Oneida
not true
counties
if in
are
fact
the
the
easiest
lease.
to get
The
welfare.
leases.
Thank
The
you.
leases. Listen, I'm not gonna get into debate with you, but
Yeah.
we
I
find
was a
all of
landlord
it.
for 25 years.
What's that?
I was a landlord for 25 years.
And
I visit my place twice a week
Yeah.
because they'd have garbage, then I'd have rodents.
yeah.
Twice
Well,
a week I had to visit.
Let
and I had all kinds of
me
people
just
in there.
answer that. You can't reside in these units for more than 14, guests cannot stay in these units for more than 14 days on an annualized basis. And we remove, we bring people to court all the time who are guests.
Yeah, but those are
But
guests.
those
What
are
about,
guests.
what about
They're not the
the
residents.
What's that?
What about what about the people?
We're required under the regulations that if in fact a person's not in compliance, that we have to do something about it. We have to bring eviction proceedings in this situation.
And
And
the
it's a
state of
very
New York
long,
protects
it's a
Let's
that.
use the
very,
pen.
very long
What's that?
procedure.
What's that?
The state of New York protects people when they don't pay their rent.
Yes.
It's
Well,
a very long
through
That's
the
procedure.
everywhere.
eviction.
That's everywhere.
Well,
in
that's
the
Well,
state.
why we
We
don't
don't
want
wanna
it.
bring it in
That's
here.
why we don't want it.
You're not bringing them in. You're meeting. You're the residents that are. The plan of action is that the residents that are going to occupy these units are people that already are in the region. We're not transplanting people. That's not the desire of this. It's to meet an existing need within your population base. And if you make as little as $20,000 or as much as $85,000, you qualify. And if whether or not they work for 3 months to get to the $20,000 level, or they work 10 months to get to the $20,000 level, they're still eligible. And the rent is based upon their earning capacity.
So the
It's not
local,
it's not a straight rent. It's based
local
upon
people
earnings.
here that do rent,
Yeah.
and you come in here,
Mhm.
what's gonna happen to their rental properties?
Well, listen.
They're all Airbnb.
We-
Not
Yeah.
all RV.
No.
Listen.
I rent that, it's not RV.
You have a whole,
If you can't prove to the state of New York that there's need, this isn't Bob Cali who's going to make a judgment call as it pertains to need.
I guess
You have to
I think
bring in
what
a
we're
third
looking
party.
for is the people, I believe, would really, I'm happy with whatever the town wants to do.
Mhm.
I'm not happy with what just the board wants to do.
That's right.
If they wanna bring this up to a vote for the town people, I'm with it all, 100%. But I don't feel like I've been informed very well. I'm your neighbor, going to be your neighbor. And you've never called me, nobody's ever, and the board's talked to me about it. The only way I found out about it is because somebody told me it was on Facebook, and we're gonna have a meeting. And here I am gonna be your neighbor, real neighbor,
But we're really
next
just,
door.
but with
And
all due
you tell me I'm gonna
respect,
be well informed?
well, with all due respect, we're just starting the process.
I understand.
I mean, you know, you have to start somewhere. You gotta start somewhere.
I
You
understand.
know, we're not trying to do things, this is not a backroom ploy or a desire to circumvent a
So I
process.
think you
But you
gotta
gotta
get
start
out there
somewhere.
a little more and let people know.
Well,
That's why we're here, Randy.
Okay.
the-
All right,
but remember,
say something.
let me just finish.
You're
Let me
neighbor.
just finish the answer, please. Let me finish the answer. Remember, initially, this was to see if in fact we could build a project on an existing town-owned site. Joy Tracker.
Is that where the dog park's going?
I don't know the answer to that question.
No,
Yeah.
not
On that little
necessarily.
Slice, okay.
So what I'm saying to you is that when we had an architect and an engineer look at that site, it was not viable from the standpoint of its geographic size. So we looked at other opportunities to create a solution. Okay, and we just identified in the last no more than a month the fact that there might be this location on North Street. So we're not here to be secretive and to hide from it. You give me your telephone number, and then when I sneeze, I'll call you. That's how transparent we are. I have no problem with
too,
doing
for
it.
everybody to understand from the board perspective too. The reason why we are here is exactly for this, to have these conversations. If we were sitting here having more in depth and got to the point where things were designed and all this other stuff without letting anybody know, oh my God, that'd be crazy. So
But the
the
land
fact
has
that
been
we are
purchased,
here
though.
right now,
No,
we all
no,
know
it's
that.
not yet.
So
I-
the
I-
fact that we're
Thomas
here right
understood.
now is exactly what you all are asking for. We are listening to your input. Nothing is done. We're all here. We're taking it all in. And so that's what it is. This is literally the start. We were presented a presentation. We decided that, hey, we should bring this to the town. Here we are. So don't think that we're like, don't know information or how many units, because the next steps are exactly this market study of that goes forwards. There's so many things that are, so many contingencies and everything else that I'm understanding, that I learn about each day because things are developing, that might not even allow this project to go forwards. So nothing is done. We are here just to hear from everybody. He's here to present. We're not even here on an official capacity, I guess, is my understanding. But we're sitting here so we can listen to what everybody has to say. And that's what, that's where we're at. So, I mean, I just want to make sure everybody knows
But
that.
there isn't 52 workers out there to be had to stay in these places, so what's
Right.
gonna happen is, they're gonna change the housing, cause they gotta keep the 90%, so then they can run it to whoever.
Absolutely.
That's the
So
problem.
how
You know what? And that's not inaccurate, but it.
Well, I know it's not inaccurate, 'cause I'm on business
It misses a step.
I'll give
And
you
the step is
applications
this.
for all you people renting houses so I can hire.
It misses a step, and that is the step is that unless we can prove that there's the need, it will never be built.
Well,
You
again,
have
you
to
just
prove-
said it, there's a need for it.
Well, no, we have to support it by way of a market study. We have to.
How are you
prove-
gonna do that?
There are professionals that go out and they come into a community, okay, and they immerse themselves and ask questions and do surveys and meet with Living ADK and other players in this community to understand the dynamics.
Who
And the
pays for
state,
that?
we do,
By yourself,
Yes.
not the town.
not the town. The $50,000 deposit, the town's not coughing up 50 grand of non-refundable money to
Well, they
hold
shouldn't.
the property for 12 months. We are.
Well, I
We're
know of
taking the
anybody
risk.
that's in business up here.
What's that?
Anybody that's in business up here, I'm sure has put up $50,000 in their buildings they've built, and they don't know if they're getting any money back. So we're no different than you are.
I'm not suggesting, but I'm just
I mean,
saying
so
is
don't
that
make
a
yourself-
commitment, a commitment is a commitment. You know, you stand by your commitment by, in part by how much you're willing to risk. Okay, and what we're willing to risk is $50,000 for a 12-month contingency and spend up to $200,000 to $300,000 in pre-development monies without any assurances that the project's going to be built. If that's not standing behind,
it's no different than any local businessman who puts his money out there and hopes he makes some money, and he's here in the community all the time, putting money into the community. So we're no different than you are.
The difference is, in the private sector, you have endless opportunities to make money. In affordable housing, there are regulatory restrictions as to what your net operating income can be. This is not an entrepreneurial situation where you can come in and make a score. This is not a score. So you're taking a greater risk for a lesser return. You're doing it truly for a civic responsibility.
That's all I can say. I hope the board's listening.
One thing on the housing though, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, there's several local businesses that own housing for people, for their employees, that have a very difficult time filling them, from what I understand. Like, isn't Calypso's Cove not opening this summer because they can't find employees even though they offer free housing?
Right.
So that's,
Our housing is full.
okay.
It's full and we could fill it twice over.
Calypso's Cove
But
is also
to the point is also, it is short term. It's not a year long, and I don't know, some people who we deed, it's not a year long commitment. It's 3 or 4 months.
Yep, and that's.
And then they don't want to
there's a
be here.
difference.
Then they're college kids or they're something else. So we also need that short term situation as well.
I'd like to ask her a question of Barbara Green, because she brought up a study that was done in 2016, and we're in 2022, and it has to do with the master plan of the town. And I know that everybody here hasn't sat on the board, I don't think, for that duration. Maybe you have. We own a house in town that we were looking to rent the apartment above the garage. We wanted to build an apartment. We were going through the procedures. And we don't own enough square footage per the lot to have that, so we needed a variance. And then there was some other things when this garage got built that we weren't even aware of because we didn't build it, that was agreed to. But that can all change, because if the master plan of the town changes, it could change to the point where you don't need that much square footage to build an apartment. Now we are only looking to rent to year-rounders. We're not doing the Airbnb thing and that. So that's one thing I want to say, that the master plan needs to be updated to accommodate to this. And also, I want to say that 2016 is a really long time ago. So whatever you agreed upon needs to be voted again. Whatever you did and all the studies you did, it's not on the table anymore. It's way past.
That's not a question, but I would like to address two things. It started in 2016. It was a community effort. It was adopted in 2019.
Was there a vote?
So,
I'd never heard anything about
a public hearing. That is where, just like this.
Well, I never
really
heard
formal.
about it, so.
Well, I can't help that.
No, but I
It
mean,
was
I live
public.
here and I read the local rag every week, and so.
It was public, and when the board adopted this, it was because it was basically.
Because I never heard anything about affordable housing or workplace housing. I know I never heard any of that nomenclature.
Well, I
and-
would suggest that you ask the town clerk for a copy to look at this, so that you can read that it is in the comprehensive plan, which is something that's only revisited every 5 years or so to update it. But in answer to what you're talking about with your garage, we are updating our zoning currently. It's nearly complete, so that it matches all this stuff in here and then some. And one of the things that we want to improve on is being able to put a apartment over a garage or an accessory dwelling unit of some sort. And this is going to come out when the zoning review is completed. And that will be something that you will be able to do for year-round rental.
Public hearing.
And, right, when the zoning review comes up, so keep reading the rag, because there will be a public hearing for that zoning review. Okay? So some of those things will be changed.
Will they
We
be,
do
will that
have
be
board
year
meetings
round
every
though?
Tuesday night.
Or will it be year
once a
round, or
month.
will you just be able to Airbnb it?
No.
I
You're
would
not
Has to be
own-
year round.
It would probably end up being deed restricted on that.
Yeah.
I'm not
I'm
talking
just
way
saying.
ahead, because that's been
Yeah.
talked about, but I would think that if that was the case and it was being built into it to help solve some of these issues,
Yeah.
it would have to be deed restricted to that, not the whole structure, but to that.
Right.
that
Well, when's that gonna be done?
It's in the works now.
it's a-
Well, if it's in the works, this is in the works too, so I mean, that should come up quicker than this, I would think.
There's
Well, it would be lovely
377
if it did.
units needed, and this would be maybe 50. So, I mean, you still have another 322
Where do we
units.
come
Where-
up
where
with
do you come up with this?
377
Right.
units? How about we talk about how many local businesses there are and how many people they employ? And then you tell me there's 377 people, not including the Enchanted Forest Water Safari, but the restaurants and that. I'm gonna say you're gonna be hard pressed to come up with 377, Diorio's,
Thankfully, we're not.
North Country, the Slickers, the Tony Harper's, the Keen, I mean, all these restaurants, if you was to add up every one of the year-round employees, you're gonna be hard pressed to come up with 377. I'm not talking about construction guys, because you know what? That's a seasonal job. You can lay those people off. I'm talking, you wanna keep your business open 365, which they don't do that, and I can understand that. We got a couple weeks mud season in the spring and in the fall, and there's the carpet gets rolled up for a little while.
Right.
Mud season. But anyways, you're gonna be hard pressed to find that. I'm just doing numbers off the top of my head with the amount of people that are employed in these places. And I think you would have a hard time. And I think this Bob Kelly's idea would be great, not up here, because there's so many extenuating circumstances that are just a variable, that it's not a solid thing. And I think we really need to concentrate on the number of people that are year-round up here before we were to looking into an endeavor like this, because there's something that everybody up here has done, and they've worked their asses off to get here, and they love living here. And I'm just gonna say straight up, I've lived all over. I've lived in Detroit, I've lived in LA, I've lived in some really crappy areas. And you're saying the workforce, but there's a voucher that could be available, and you know, the bad apples are the ones that ruin it for everybody. But if we have something like this, and then these people only work you're saying 3 months out of the year, which that's not true. They're gonna work more than that. They're gonna work the summer season, we'll say right off the top of my head, Memorial Day to Columbus Day. We'll extend it to Columbus Day because of the leaf peepers. Then you get that lull. Then you get the snowmobile season, December 1st to the end of March. That's the truth.
Listen, I'm not, I
And that's
never
all, when I
said
said
3 months.
extenuating
You guys
circumstances,
said 3 months.
wait a minute, wait,
Your
let
friends
me
in the
talk.
back
You've been-
there said
You've been
3 months.
talking, I've been listening. So, you're a prominent businessman, you live in a great neighborhood in New Hartford. And what we're saying is, to me, being an American, and I'm sorry right now, everybody, I'm not gonna be politically correct. But this to me is a socialism ideology, to bring in government-funded housing, not capitalism, where the Noonan woman right there can attest to her father and before them and what they laid out to make that the largest tax collecting for the county of Herkimer in all of Herkimer County. That business brings in more revenue tax-wise in this Town of Webb neighborhood than anywhere else in Herkimer County. And those people risked everything, and they've made it work because it's America and it's capitalism. It's not socialism, and it's not government-funded money coming in And when it goes down the tubes, it turns our beautiful community that your father had a camp in and would probably be rolling over. I didn't know him in his grave about bringing us here. And I think you think you're doing a good thing, but you're also a businessman. So that's all I wanted to say. I get that off of my.
I'm a businessman, but I don't generate any personal profit by engaging in a project such as this. I don't benefit.
You got it.
No,
You wouldn't.
I
be
don't.
here.
I don't. I get paid a salary. I get paid a salary.
Right, good.
I get paid a salary, and I'll just say this. Listen, and I don't want to make this red and blue. I don't want to make this red and blue, but I'm going to mention red and blue. From a housing authority standpoint, we received more funding from the federal government during the Trump administration than we did from the Obama administration.
Trump.
He gave us more. He gave us more. He gave us more public housing affordable funding to run our business than Obama did. So this isn't red. This isn't socialism. This isn't capitalism. This is to address a need.
When things are paid for by someone else.
What's that?
When things are paid for by me, the taxpayer, and someone is getting a break for that. I didn't get a break when I'm a lineman. I went through a trade school. I work for the power company now. I didn't get no break. I worked my ass off. My body's beat up. You gave me some bleeding heart things you were telling me about people that were in need.
Yes.
And I didn't get no break. And I would say most of the people up here didn't get a break, but if they did, they rose to the occasion. And there's people that do that. I get it. But there's the bad apples. They're going to take this beautiful neighborhood down. And it isn't always been a beautiful neighborhood because my buddy got murdered on Labor Day up here. And he was a 911 hero, all right? And the pile that turned him into dust was given the house from his father. And those are the kind of people we don't want up here.
And we listen. I respect your position, and I respect the fact that you bring sweat equity to the forefront based upon your work ethic. But this is more about addressing a need in order to sustain a community.
That's what you keep going back to, but we just talked about the number of people, and I know you're saying there's going to be a study, the number of people that are working here year-round. And then I got 2 rental places. I'm going to have 2 places I want to rent, and I would actually be able to turn the house probably if this master plan goes through into a duplex. So then I'd have 3, and I'm looking at that for some kind of retirement income. And I was always about doing a year-round rental. There's a woman here that unfortunately I didn't get off my butt quick enough to be able to rent to her, that I was going to rent to her year-round, and maybe it'll still happen, but I just,
I mean, our goal is not to undermine the existing community. I know that words are cheap, but I'd say that with all due sincerity. We're not trying to undermine.
Well, should the town
undermine your ability? So let's see what the market study. We'll share it with you. You can read it. We'll bring the people that generate the market study to a public meeting, and after you read it and address it. If we can't sustain the need, and you're essentially saying there is no need, or the need can be met with regards to the existing housing base, if in fact there are some tweaks to the master plan or the zoning law, and that will all come out in the wash. Because we're not going to invest.
Didn't we have a low-income housing
What's that?
development here once before?
We have Lakeside Terrace.
No, we had Moose River Commons.
And it's full, and there's a waiting list. It wasn't
Well,
low-income housing. That was a private entity that
It was
built homes
it
and
was
rents them.
advertised as a low-income housing.
There were
And
never
there was
any.
only
There's no.
one teacher that jumped on it to get in there with the low income.
This is next door to BRK.
Yes.
It was marketed as low income housing.
Yes, it was.
But it was not subsidized in any way.
It was not subsidized.
It was
But
private.
he
Private,
couldn't make
private.
it work, so then he opened it to the community.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good.
You know,
But it
we
didn't go
can't
the
just
first time,
unilaterally.
so
We just can't unilaterally change the rules.
Because of, actually the law It is now full and they are all working people. I live next door.
Right.
And as a neighbor, I have never had a problem with any of those people there. Good, hardworking people.
Right.
And every one of them is fully employed.
Right.
Or
Between the Strand Theater and Adirondack Beach.
One thing I'll throw out there, should the town fund the study?
Pay for their rent.
The only reason I say, should the town fund this feasibility study? The only reason I say that is, you know, I know Mr. Galley's organization would want to do it. But you probably have a lot of people saying, well, no, it's not by the town, it's by the actual developer that wants to do this.
The town board has not committed to anything yet, nothing.
But should they consider the funding of the study though? I think it would take the bias out of everything.
I think you're making it sound like they're going to be, like they're gonna lie.
Oh, no, that's not at all.
Well, that's the implication I'm getting
I'm
from
sorry, so
this.
let me clarify. I work in an industry where they would never let us, we do these studies or participate in these all the time. They wouldn't let us fund a study for something that we're working to implement or build.
And the
That's
people that-
that's what I meant.
No,
I
listen,
didn't mean any other
listen,
regard.
it's a legitimate question, but, you know, if these people lie or embellish or exaggerate, they're gonna lose credibility in their own little marketplace, and they're not gonna have anybody come to them. I mean, the state of New York, at the end of the day, is quite thorough in their review of these things. And they only acknowledge certain players to be valid purveyors of information such as this. So if we went and tried to bring some, again, Tom, Dick, and Harry into the equation and said, hey, Tom, you know, just do just slap together a market study to justify, that's really doing a disservice to our organization, because we're taking a lot of risk, financial guarantees and all the other things. So we want an honest, straightforward, objective analysis, because if it comes back and suggests, as people in the room have suggested, that it's not going to warrant the need, we probably don't do the project. Because we're on the hook financially for 15 years from a compliance standpoint. So we don't want a cob job. We want a real, genuine, earnest, objective study. And you know what? If we gave them a cob job, you know what the state would do? Say you're not worthy of even being considered for a job if you're going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. We're not going to accept that stuff. So I got to be honest with you. There's an entity, and you can look it up. It's called Newmark. I believe that name's Newmark. That is considered the leader in generating market studies. And that's who we would use in such of this. And they're not going to put their credibility and their livelihood at stake for a 50-unit project in the town of Webb. It's not going to happen. And neither are we.
Now, you're giving yourself due diligence of a year.
Right.
How are you getting your stuff pushed through the EPA, DEC, Adirondack Park, the water conservation, all of that stuff,
Might
where
take more.
people like us, it could take 6 months.
We're not-
And you're getting your stuff done real quick.
No,
How
no,
is that
we're
possible?
not, we have no assurances, and that's a great question. We have no assurances that it's going to get done in a year. But that's the length of time that the seller has provided to us. So if at the end of the year we haven't met those contingencies, those approvals that you just referenced, we have to make a judgment call. And the judgment call is one of two options. We either bow out, because we only had a year grace period, and give up the $50,000 non-refundable deposit, or risk buying the property knowing that we don't have all the approvals and we won't know that we will have them. So none of these agencies have promised anything to us with regards to a year. None. And in fact, most of the agencies we haven't interacted with. So they haven't made any promises or overtures to us. So they're not treating us any different. They haven't said, we're going to movie up the pipeline, we're going to circumvent the process, we're going to streamline the process. None of that has occurred. The 1 year is the limit that the seller's willing to hold the property from being sold on the open marketplace.
So you haven't investigated any of these departments to see if this project is actually even possible?
Well, we know that from a funding standpoint, these projects are funded.
I'm not worrying about
Okay.
funding, I'm
Well,
asking about approvals.
without funding, you don't have to worry about anything else. That is critical. But in terms of talking with the APA, and I know you shake your head with all due respect, if you want to chime in terms of what I'm saying that's inaccurate, I'd be happy to listen to you. But just don't shake your head no. So we haven't talked with APA.
Ron.
We haven't talked with APA. We haven't talked with the planning people. We haven't talked with any of these agencies, and you don't do it until you know that you're going to move forward. You're going to move forward, and we haven't made that decision. We have negotiated in principle a deal that's predicated upon us putting $50,000 down. And what we've said to the seller, and we've been totally open and transparent with the seller, is until we've had meetings with the town, engage their interest, with the community, engage their interest, we're not going to put $50,000 down. So this is why we're trying to get the feedback from, good, bad, or indifferent feedback from you to see if in fact this is worthy of risking $50,000 and signing on the bottom line and starting the clock on a 1-year period. We don't know if those approvals are going to take a year, 18 months, 24 months, or never happen. But the only thing we know is the seller's not giving us more than a year as we sit here today.
And that's a person that has a $20 million venture in their portfolio, 50 grand, you don't want to lose 50 grand. But also 50 grand is a drop in the hat to you as a businessman with a $20 million portfolio.
$20 million is our budget. That's not profit.
Right. But you're
not
running
profit. I can tell you what our profit is. Our profits were a not-for-profit. Okay, we commit all the entire $20 million to our annual operating expenses. Nobody personally profits by being involved in this endeavor. I get paid a set salary, okay, whether or not I have 800 units, 1,300 units, do a project in Utica, do a project in Webb. This is really just a labor of love to try to assist the community. Now, if in fact the love isn't shared, we respect that. We respect that. We go home and we look for other opportunities. As I told you, I mean, we got a 10-year endeavor to reposition our entire portfolio at $300 million. I don't need to be in the town of Webb. I'm not looking to profit from the town of Webb. I'm not looking to score in the town of Webb. I've been told that there's a need in this community, and I want to try to lend our expertise and our experience and our knowledge to address that issue. If you don't feel it's warranted, if you feel that we're gonna bring the dredges of the world from Utica to your township and to your front door, I respect that, but that's not the intention. It's not the intention, ladies and gentlemen. It's not.
I think I can speak for the board. We didn't, how do I say this? There was nothing that we were gonna do until we had these open meetings with the community. We all decided that, am I right, you guys?
Correct.
We weren't gonna do anything until we had open conversation with the community. There's no decision. So to think that we did something behind your backs or anything like that, there's nothing been done. That's why we're sitting here listening. And we can't have a public hearing because in a public hearing, we can't even speak legally.
And so my understanding too of this process, and maybe I'm asking a question too, is, you know, we're here, and then if they move forward with a market study, they're going to come back and present the market study to the community and to the board. From there, I think you would then go into a design phase and then present that to the planning board. And that gets determined if it needs to go to the zoning board. And all those steps go through, and there's always public opinion and everything else like that. And that's where you'll start hearing more about what they're proposing of how many units, what the market study says there was to be there. So there's a lot of information that we've all been asking, but there's just not physical answers. So here we are at the first step of this whole process.
So it's a great question. Let's just talk about process. And let's talk about next steps. If in fact we make a judgment call that we're going to risk the $50,000, sign the contract, and move forward, what would be the next steps? Market study would be certainly at the top of the list. But we also we would also do things because we have a short window from a weather standpoint to address other things. So we would do things concurrently. I mean, we would spend more money than just market study. We would do a wetlands study and soil borings to understand the footprint of where we're at at this 55 acres, so that we could then understand, and we would bring those results back to the community. We would then, if in fact we felt that those things were worthy of moving forward and spending additional pre-development expenses, we would then get into a conceptual stage. We would have an architect take the footprint that's been identified as usable space in this 55 acres, ascertain how many units could be built on this footprint. We would have to determine number of units, not just based upon footprint, but what the market study suggests in terms of what's viable. And then we would bring back those preliminary concepts in terms of site plans, in terms of renderings, in terms of number of units, in terms of demographics with regards to how many children would be living in these sites, how many 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom units that we'd come back to the community at large, and we would present both the data as well as the concepts. And based upon the feedback, we would tweak. Because, again, at the end of the day, guys, I'll speak until the cows come home. At the end of the day, this has to be a project that fits the community. While we might be the ultimate deciders, because we're the ones that are ultimately taking the risk, that's not how we operate. It has to be done in concert and in collaboration, God bless you, in concert and collaboration of the community.
So with that being said, I'd like to ask Bonnie again, are we going to present this to the residents of the town of Webb for a vote? And I know you responded, you had to get a hold of the lawyer, and then Paul said you had to do a referendum or something.
We don't know that it constitutes a public vote because this is a private entity coming in to buy a piece of property. So we don't know that it constitutes a vote unless we start spending taxpayer money. Then it would constitute some discussion.
And then it will be town money, right? If we have to invest money into the sewer, the roads, the water.
We don't have
Am I
anything
correct?
in writing yet what.
You know, that's to be determined, but could that be a possibility if in fact there's insufficient capacity, insufficient pressures, the necessity of a pump station? The answer to those questions, that would be a negotiation that would have to take place, a dialogue that would have to take place. We can't mandate that the town contribute towards those things, but it would be certainly a topic for conversation.
But earlier you had mentioned also that the town, you're gonna take a risk and the town's gonna have to match some of that risk for the monies that will go forward to proceed with the project.
They can say no, but is there a potential for the conversation taking place? The answer is yes.
So at that
but there has
point,
been no commitment,
money,
no commitment, no request made by our organization for town commitment, okay? And as such, there has been no town commitment proffered because we've never asked for that. That has to be all part of this due diligence and conceptual study or conceptual review by architects and engineers to get to the point to understand. And you know, the ultimate goal is to try, let's just say it, we needed it hypothetically. I'll repeat it, hypothetically. Need a pump station. Well, I'm just saying, hypothetically. The first objective is to see if in fact we can build it into the development budget and not make an ask. maybe they say to us, hey, Callie, would you contribute some of your developer fee to offset that pump station? So that it isn't a request to the town board. That's the kind of dialogue and interaction that has to take place. So there aren't any assurances as we sit here today as to if there's going to be town contribution, whether they're willing to make any contribution, and to what extent that contribution might be. Those topics are reserved for further discussion if in fact the merit requires those things to be discussed.
Well, I know there's a pump station right now that is over here in the parking lot of the police station. I helped hook up the three-phase bank, so I know that the poop isn't gonna run uphill from North Street to the sewer plant. And I don't know if that pump station can handle the amount of people that we're gonna add to the sewer at that point. So, I mean, I don't know if that thing's full tilt boogie right now, or if it need, you know, I don't know.
I think I can answer that question kind of, in essence, that we did ask that question to, because obviously that would be a big problem right off the bat.
Well, it'd be a huge expense to the town.
Exactly, so
Period.
we did
That's
ask
it.
that question to the engineer, 'cause we did do a study, and they checked all the lines and everything like that, and that it did come back, I believe, it's my understanding that it will be capacity that, or not, it has the capacity to handle it.
The sewer plant.
The sewer plant, and
The sewer plant does, but the pump station
and I
is
believe
where
my
we're-
understanding was that this station down here that it would be pumped to this pump station.
Mhm.
Not that I'm an expert at this because I'm still learning it all, but my understanding is that this station down here can handle it and that the sewer plant can handle it. That being said, we still don't know what that number is. So again, there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot.
When it comes time to spend the taxpayer money, we'll let you know what that amount is. We're not gonna go spend it and not let you know what that is.
So that's all before the project would
Correct.
become to fruition.
Correct.
So we would all get to know that. That's
You will definitely know how
Well,
much it is.
they as a private individual, private company, they have to check the boxes. There's all these contingencies that have to be fulfilled in order for them to move forwards. So if something happens that stops something from going forward,
So Bonnie, on a personal note,
Mm-hmm.
will the infrastructure of the sewer system that's not working right, will that get fixed? Will that have priority over theirs or not?
So, from what my understanding is, we have grants out for the infrastructure on Main Street. From what my understanding is, anything that's built this way will not go down Main Street. It will not hit the pipes that are,
No, but will the stuff that's already got problems,
right.
will that get fixed before?
We're trying to get grant money for that, and if we do,
Because
it will.
it's not good.
Because that's Garmin Avenue.
No, Main Street.
Main Street, Pullman Avenue, there's 6 areas of concern in the town of Webb right now.
Didn't the sewer back up on Garmin Avenue down towards Gilbert and that?
That got fixed, that's fixed.
That's all, but
Yeah.
isn't there like 2 lines running down there?
I mean, we're talking
Ow.
old
They're-
sewer.
I don't know.
We're addressing that
so I just
simultaneously,
wanted to
there's
know
not
where
one
that-
over the other.
I just
Yes.
want to
One
know
over the
where.
other.
regardless of anything that's
It'd be
happening,
nice to
that
get
is
it
being
fixed
addressed.
before it's all backed up in the house
I'm here
again.
for this.
We've been working on that for a few
It's
years.
been going on for a while.
It's a good
So
question.
it's a great question because we ran into that problem at Roosevelt Residences. And so what the state said to us because they review all the engineering reports and studies. And they said the engineering report identified X number of critical repairs that were necessary in the neighborhood per se that needed to be addressed before you could tie into that system. And they insisted that those critical repairs be built into the project for either paid for by the city or paid for by the project, or they wouldn't give us the necessary approvals. So if there are ancillary critical repairs that need to be done, they will have to be addressed as part of this as a result of this engineering stuff.
And I know the board wants to hear why we're here. I also understand that, and I don't know how this works with Indera, but they've wanted sewer for 50 years.
Right.
So, I don't know where that's going either.
Very simply, some of the answers to that remember, they're sewer districts. They all have to buy in, and it's gonna cost the sewer districts, not all the general taxpayers, it's sewer district. And it gets very expensive. That's why some of these lines, when you're talking millions of dollars, the folks that are on the sewer system, it's gonna affect you. So we're trying to get money to fix those, so it doesn't affect
I just
the sewer
like to know that
district.
you're aware. But it will,
Oh,
because
yes,
it
we
raises
are
taxpayer
very
money.
aware of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because I mean, like I had a house in Michigan on a lake and they put all these pump stations in and I only lived there for maybe 5 years, but boy, I'll tell you, my taxes were astronomical because they, you know, it was ruining the lake. And that, I understand that, but.
Do we have
So
any-
we're gonna focus, just in closing, and be happy to answer any questions after the meeting.
Good job.
In closing, you know, we're gonna focus right now upon need and viability. You know, because that's the overwhelming, overarching discussion that has to take place to determine whether we get into the weeds. Is there an overarching need within the community, and is a project, the magnitude of which is to be determined, viable and feasible in the town of Webb? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves in order to get down into the weeds, in order to decide whether or not we're going to put $50,000 at risk, regardless of how much money our annual budget is. It's still money, and we're going to ask ourselves a third question. In light of the public feedback that's been generated by the two meetings, and I respect it and I thank you for it, regardless of where you stand, is People First willing to move forward and put a purchase offer down on 55 acres? Before our meetings of the last 2 weeks, the answer has been yes. Our Board of Commissioners has been extremely supportive because we felt that there was, in fact, an acute need, based upon the conversations that we had. We now have to make a judgment call. You know, we'll go back early part of next week and speak with our chairman and our vice chairman, give an honest and forthright summary of the comments and concerns and perspectives that were shared with us, and then we've got to make a judgment call. But I can say this, if in fact the judgment call is to move forward, this isn't the end of the dialogue, this isn't the end of the input, this isn't the end of your perspective, this isn't the end of sharing information with you. When we get that market study, the first people that will get it is the town, and we're going to say to them, feel free to share it. Put it on your website, put it on social media, send it to the players that you feel are important in this community that can spread the word. Because again, we want to make the right decisions, not the wrong decision. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I want to wish all of you a happy 4th of July, and I want to thank you for inviting us as your guests to discuss what I view as an important and critical topic. So thank you, I appreciate it.
So, just real quick, how long before you do the market study?
For the need for we've been told that a market study would take 4 to 6 weeks to accomplish. Through
is it
through Newmark.
in the process right now?
No. Remember, we haven't even signed a purchase offer. We're not going to do a market study unless we know we've got a piece of property tied up for a year. So the first order of business is to talk with our Board of Commissioners, tell them what your input, your concerns, your perspectives are, and see if in fact they want to move forward. So the first step is to determine whether or not we're going to put $50,000 down on a piece of property on North Street. If in fact the answer to that is yes, once the ink dries on the purchase agreement and the contract, we will immediately start a market study, and we've been told that that's a 4 to 6 week endeavor.
Okay.
I have a question for you. You said the money the town has to invest before the vote will be outspoken. How much money do you have to invest before that can happen?
We don't have any numbers yet. We don't have,
I mean, if you put in $10, would that give us a vote?
Well, it's the town's money, so they should.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, is how much money the town, you said the town has, before you can go away, the town has to be in it.
we have to have be presented with something first. We haven't been asked for a dime yet. So until that happens, we don't have any information on
Is the
that.
board in favor of putting it up for a vote or not?
Some of us are and some of us aren't.
Plus, when I can earn part-time, I haven't worked for 5.5 years.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.